Today at the National Press Club, Greens leader Christine Milne. Senator Milne is one of the country's most experienced environmental activists and led her party's negotiations with the government over the carbon tax. In her first address to the Press Club since becoming leader, she'll be setting out the Greens' economic vision. Christine Milne with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club and today's National Australia Bank Press Club address. I'm Lyndal, political editor for ABC News 24 and on the board of the National Press Club. Today's speaker is Christine Milne, a politician since 1989. She's been in politics now nearly a quarter of a century. I hope that doesn't make you feel old. She started off in the Tasmanian State Parliament. She became leader of the state Greens in 1993 when the then leader Bob Brown moved to the federal arena. A little over a decade later, she made her own move to federal parliament, and this year history repeated itself when she took over as leader when Bob Brown decided to retire from politics. As we heard in the introduction, this is Christine's first address to the National Press Club since she took on the leadership of the Greens. Please make welcome Senator Christine Milne.
Well, thank you very much, Lyndal, and thank you to the distinguished people here, and I welcome especially my parliamentary colleagues from both my party room and also from the ACT Greens. I wanted to also acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and also undertake that the Greens will keep on campaigning for Indigenous recognition in our Australian Constitution because it goes to the heart of who we are as a nation, a country that is big enough and generous enough to acknowledge where we've gone wrong and what we need to do better. That leads me to today's question. How do we build an economic system that serves the needs of people and nature, both for today and for tomorrow? That our economic system is broken and needs fixing is not just the view of the Greens. It's the view of the World Economic Forum, which in its report More with Less, Scaling Sustainable Consumption and Resource Efficiency that they released in January this year said, current trends clearly show that business as usual no longer works. Unless the present link between growth and the consumption of scarce resources is severed, our resource base, governance and policy structures are unlikely to sustain the standard of living societies have grown accustomed to or indeed aspire to. Action to decouple business and economic growth from resource intensity and environmental impact has never been more critical to the long-term success of business. Now, in Australia, this is heresy. Witness the state and federal governments massively expanding coal infrastructure and approving at the same time the destruction of areas of the Great Barrier Reef and the Tarkine. Surely it's time that those who advocate economic growth derived from resource extraction and pollution as the major path be the ones who are labelled wacky, loopy, irresponsible, divorced from reality and connected to the CIA. Australia's economy is described as the envy of the world, and we have just posted our 21st consecutive year of economic growth, with Australia outperforming most of the rest of the world. The unemployment rate is low, inflation is under control, and Australia is one of only 7 countries in the world to have maintained its AAA credit rating. And yet, millions of Australians feel uncertain about the future, they feel uncomfortable, under pressure, and there are many reasons for that. The two-speed economy is frequently cited, as is the GFC. But another is the relentless negativity of Tony Abbott, talking the country down with his catalogue of complaints. And that's not just a political line. Economists will tell you that negative expectations become self-fulfilling, impacting on investment across the economy. But I want to focus today on the underlying reason, and that is that short-term profits and this year's carefully manipulated budget surplus are overriding the basic human need to care for one another, to plan for a secure future and to protect the natural world which sustains us. In other words, our much-envied economy is on borrowed time. The economy is a tool a tool that we humans invented, like democracy and politics, to help govern our relationships between each other and between ourselves and the world that we live in. If our economic tools are not getting the outcomes we want, making us happy and safe, healthy, better educated and fulfilled, and protecting and preparing our country for an increasingly uncertain future in a world on track to be at least 4 degrees warmer, then it's time that our economic tools changed. Yet they seem entrenched. Despite Wayne Swan's rhetoric, Gina Rinehart, Twiggy Forrest, Clive Palmer and their companies pay little tax. They benefit from multi-million-dollar handouts to their mining operations, and they still have their hands out for more. We're told day in, day out that it's vital for the economy that they're given every break they demand, every environmental protection be set aside for their benefit, something that the Gillard government plans to deliver by devolving environmental powers to the states later this year. But who does this actually benefit? Does it benefit the single mum, not knowing how she's going to put food on the table once the Labor government cuts her support payments to below the poverty line? What about the stressed parent, rushing through peak hour traffic yet again to pick up kids from school, from after-school care, feed them a quick dinner before trying to catch up on the bills and the housework? Or the older and professional men and women stressing about their own retirement while trying to access aged care for their parents? Does it help the young parent looking despairingly at graphs of the Arctic sea ice melt, reading that we have reached a global tipping point and wondering what kind of planet that their child is going to inherit? And what about the farmer whose greatest wish was to pass on healthy land to his children, but is now fighting to keep it from being riddled with coal seam gas wells while struggling with farm gate prices being pushed by Coles and Woolworths right down through the floor? It's clear from this list alone that while the economy is growing, our quality of life is stagnating, our environment is suffering, and we're failing as a country to invest seriously in the things that we value, the things that we need now if we are to have a better future. And that is, of course, a fair education system where you get a good start in life regardless of how much money you have or where you live, a zero-emissions energy network that doesn't pollute the air and drive global warming, a health system which takes care of us all from the state of our teeth to the state of our minds. It's time to change, to diversify the economy, to clean it up and invest in a future that doesn't rely on digging it up, cutting it down and shipping it overseas. The old parties are grounded in the belief that the economy is an end in itself and that we have to balance the need to care for people and the need to protect the environment against the need of the economy. When you think about this, it simply makes no sense at all. Now, Tasmanians recognised that in 1972 and established the world's first Green Party. And the idea reached mainstream in 1987, when after an exhaustive 3-year process involving scientists, economists, governments, research institutes, industrialists, NGOs and the general public, the Brundtland Report of the World Commission on Environment and Development, Our Common Future, was published. Now, that report revealed that world leaders were able to think rationally and caringly about the present and the future, and it's probably most famous for articulating the concept of ecologically sustainable development. That is, as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, that's a concept that Tony Abbott, Gina Rinehart, Campbell Newman, Martin Ferguson, many more have utterly failed to understand. One of Brundtland Report's most forgotten insights is that there are only 2 real things in the world, and that is people and nature. The economy is not a physical thing. It's not something that exists in its own right. Rather, it's a tool that we invented for governing the relationship between people and nature. But when the Brundtland Report went to the World Bank, tragically that insight was lost, and what came out of the World Bank was a triangle: people, nature and the economy. And ever since then, we've been plunged straight back into the old view of the world where nature lost every time and was traded off against people's short-term benefits and the economy. And the next iteration of this will be the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, where a short-term economic focus will trump the physical science and long-term needs of the communities. The economic tools are delivering bad environmental, social and economic outcomes. Most of the battles of political philosophy over the last 2 centuries have been about competing views on how to run an economy, where the old economic right, broadly speaking, has sought to create a strong economy and the old left tried to create a fair economy. Neither has grappled with how you can have an economy that is strong or fair when ecological limits are being reached. It's this classic old poster, without environment there is no economy. In Australia, the old parties emerged at a time when it was believed that the planet had an infinite capacity to give us resources and an infinite capacity to absorb our waste. This was never true, of course, but at the time when the Australian population was under 4 million and the global population was 1.5 billion, it was a lot closer to being true than it is now. And on that basis, I think we can forgive Edmund Barton and Chifley and Menzies for not speaking about ecological sustainability, but instead focusing on how the bounty of this great country should be divided between the owners of capital and the providers of labour. What is not excusable is that the old parties continue to do so. They've failed to keep up over recent decades when the huge ecological challenges of the 21st century, whether you're talking about accelerating global warming, food and water shortages, air and water pollution, energy crises, resource depletion in a world heading to 9 billion people. These are the things that have become overwhelming. And how can we say that we're working towards a strong or a fair economy when we aren't addressing these challenges? And just as we hit the big limits, the big old parties are moving closer to each other and further out of touch with what people and the real world actually need. Tony Abbott's Liberals want to pretend that we can keep on going the way we did in the 1950s, exploiting resources and exploiting those worse off than we are and dismissing global warming as crap. The Labor Party, on the other hand, wants to embrace transformative policies and benefits, but on the other hand it wants to cling to the past. Witness its contradictory policies on pricing pollution while bending over backwards to expand the coal sector, coal seam gas and protect fossil fuel subsidies. Both the old parties still see the economy as an end in itself. The Prime Minister overnight described her job as, and I quote, "keeping the economy strong." They demonstrate time and time again that they will sacrifice people's health, the environment that sustains us, and vital support for the people who are doing toughest of all in order to maximise short-term profits and election cycle budget surpluses. Are we supposed to give Wayne Swan and Penny Wong a tick because the budget is in surplus, when to achieve that they're going to deny the unemployed a $50 a week increase in Newstart, locking them and their children, as Four Corners showed this week, into cycles of poverty? Tony Abbott has taken the surplus fetish, I have to say, to new loopy levels, adopting the US Tea Party strategy of attempting to block lifting the debt ceiling. Now, while objection to debt bears scrutiny in the USA, where the debt to GDP ratio is over 100%, or Japan, where it's well over 200%, Australia's debt is remarkably low at 29% of our GDP, the fourth lowest in the OECD. Not only was Abbott's stunt based on willful economic ignorance, but success would have had a devastating consequence for real people. Pensioners, the unemployed, customs, even hospitals would have been faced with going without in order to bring the country to a grinding halt, and that's what he was prepared to engineer in his quest for power. Abbott also accuses Julia Gillard of spending like a drunken sailor, but in reality both of them are caught in a surplus fetish that countless economists and business leaders have said is not only unnecessary but counterproductive. While the Greens support running a balanced budget over the economic cycle, trying to hit a political surplus target when an economy is already weakening has serious consequences for people's lives, for small business and for our future, because it defers essential investment in education, health and innovation. The surplus fetish must end. We need a proper debate about what's good for the country, over what time frame, and how to raise the necessary funds to deliver it. The Greens are calling on the government to either work with us to find the savings and revenue in a forward-thinking, caring manner, or use the upcoming mid-year economic forecast to delay their ill-advised quest for a surplus at all costs, and it should be delayed closer to 2015-16. The irony is that commentators continue to attack the Greens as not being credible on economic policy, when in fact we're the only party willing to grapple with investing in our future while transitioning towards living within our means. We're the only party willing to take on the vested interests and the rent seekers and represent not only this generation but those who come after us. So where does this lead? Einstein said, "You don't solve problems with the same thinking that created them." So to set us on a new path, a path to an economy which serves the needs of people and nature both for today and tomorrow, we need new economic tools. We need to learn to do more with less. We need to reprioritise our investments, and we need sensible management of taxation and revenue in order to fund these investments. It's a case of rethink, reduce, reuse and recycle. For most of us going about our daily lives, the new, caring, ecologically sustainable society will look very similar in most ways to the old one. Yes, it'll be powered entirely by clean renewable energy, including electric cars, buses, trains and trams, and there'll be more cycleways and better designed homes and offices. And I want to witness here particularly in the ACT, with the Greens' light rail proposal in the upcoming election and building on their 40% greenhouse gas reduction target and renewable energy support. And I particularly acknowledge and thank our 3 ACT Greens members for being here on that and congratulate them on what they've done to date and wish you all the best in the election upcoming. In most ways, though, the new sustainable society will look the same but perform much better. And in that society, any job can be a green job. It just means a slight shift in focus. What will be different, though, is that we'll have replaced the idea that Australia's wealth is dependent on digging it up, cutting it down and shipping it overseas, with the knowledge that our prosperity depends instead at a personal and collective level on our brains, on our health, on our creativity and on a healthy environment. Of course, that challenges those who've gone unchallenged for generations, and it's the heart of those who are currently in power, not just in politics. And for that reason, our vision is labelled as unrealistic or wacky by people who cannot or will not imagine a world different from the one in which they're currently powerful or comfortably making a profit. And it isn't surprising. Machiavelli recognised this a long time ago when he wrote, "There's nothing more difficult to carry out, nor more doubtful of success, nor more dangerous to handle than to initiate a new order of things, for the reformer has enemies in all those who profit by the old order." So how would the Greens recalibrate the economic tools? How would we make them enhance our natural, human, social, manufactured and financial capital? Contrary to what you hear from some of our more excitable detractors, the Greens do not want to dismantle the market economy. Our view is encapsulated neatly by Hunter and Amy Lovins and Paul Hawken in their book Natural Capitalism. And I quote, "Markets make a good servant, a poor master and an even worse religion." Take a look at global financial markets today. Following the catastrophic failure of some of the world's most sophisticated asset markets, to see what happens when we stop regulating and allow what Keynes described as animal spirits to run unchecked. Markets are useful tools to achieve an outcome. The Greens adopted one in our long push to put a price on pollution through an emissions trading scheme. But markets need to be constantly evaluated against the outcomes that society and the environment require of them. The ETS has to drive a transition to a low-carbon economy, or be corrected for market failure by increasing the renewable energy target, for example, to at least 50% by 2030 to get us where we need to be to tackle accelerating global warming. The other accusation our detractors often throw at us is that we're anti-growth, and therefore we want everybody to go back to living in caves, sipping nettle broth and whittling Huon pine condoms, as the former Tasmanian Premier Tony Rundle famously said. Given that we are some of the country's strongest proponents of new technologies, from broadband to smart grids to 3D printing, the caves jibe has always been nonsense. But are the Greens actually anti-growth? That depends on what you're growing and how it's measured. I am for growing natural, human, social, manufactured and financial capital, and I'm against growing global warming, species extinction, poverty, poor health, inequality, conflict and corruption. As John Stuart Mill wrote in 1848, there would be much room for improving the art of living and much more likelihood of its being improved when minds cease to be engrossed by the art of getting on. The Greens want to see everyone given the opportunity to practice the art of living. We want to see people lifted out of poverty, and we know that unless this is done while protecting the environment which sustains us, it'll only last a very short time. And that is what growth is supposed to achieve. The problem is we measure it with the wrong tools, tools which tell us we're growing when in fact we're not. If economic growth, as it currently measured, isn't actually making us happier and healthier, cleverer or safer, then it isn't real growth. If we're growing our economy in defiance of the physical limits of the planet, then that isn't real growth, it's a confidence trick. On the other hand, if people are getting happier and healthier, if we're protecting and restoring the environment which sustains us, if our schools and universities and research institutions are thriving, if we're helping unemployed people find worthwhile jobs and we're addressing structural inequalities such as illiteracy, surely that's real growth, regardless of what the GDP figures are actually saying. GDP measures what we make and what we consume, not who we are, that is our human and social capital, or where we live on our planet, our natural capital. It ignores work done in the home and volunteer work across society. It disregards the entrenched gap between rich and poor. It loves a catastrophe like a car accident or the Queensland floods because they generate economic activity regardless of the human cost. GDP is useful for its purpose, for predicting tax revenues, for example, but it cannot be seen as a definition of our progress as a nation. As Robert Kennedy put it, the gross national product doesn't allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It doesn't include the beauty of our poetry or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. There is work being done on this around the world, and within the existing national accounts, measures such as real net national disposable income per capita address some of these measures and problems. And the Australian Bureau of Statistics dashboard measuring Australia's progress, along with its involvement in global efforts to construct environmental accounts, are steps in the right direction. South Australia has indicators in a strategic plan, and Tasmania had Tasmania Together until it was corrupted by the Labor government of the day. Fairfax's work with lateral economics in establishing and publishing a wellbeing index brings the concept to a large audience regularly. But none of these efforts go to the heart of government decision-making. We have to limit our use of GDP to those purposes it is suited to and measure our true progress as a nation with different tools. The Greens will redouble our efforts to support development of the best possible economic tools and work to see them adopted across government and society so that we can build and measure the well-being of people and nature for the long term. In short, the Greens do want to see growth, but growth in quality of life, growth in equality in society, growth that plans for the long term. And central to that is that need to decouple growth from resource use and pollution. In short, to do more with less, or as economists would say, to increase productivity. Productivity is a word that suffers terrible abuse at the hands of prominent lobbyists and the Liberal Party in particular, and contrary to what they say, there is no evidence that allowing workers to be treated more harshly and unfairly does anything to improve society. Productivity gains are best found through investing in the future of the economy through education, R&D, better health and better resource efficiencies. All these are central Green goals, and my team of Green MPs are working on policies in all of these areas. Healthier people are more productive workers with fewer sick days. If we invest now in publicly funded dental care, we'll save billions of dollars in other healthcare costs into the future. And we know that healthy teeth make a difference to how we feel about ourselves. A better educated population is a more productive population. That's one reason why the Greens have been such strong supporters of the Gonski recommendations for fairer school funding, and we've been strong opponents of the cuts to TAFE and university funding, especially in this Asian century. Better schools and a fairer funding system might seem expensive now, but the benefits of making that investment accrue to millions of people. The child who goes to a good school gets a good start in life, has more opportunities to get better jobs, and is likelier to be healthier and happier. And the benefits of that to the whole economy accrue through improved productivity, higher tax revenue and lower costs to support people struggling because they had a poor education in the first place. If you're living on support so low you struggle to afford food and rent, how can you prepare yourself to get back into the workforce? The Greens are working hard inside and outside the parliament to lift the New Start and Youth Allowance by $50 a week. Spending the money to lift New Start to a livable level is not only the right thing to do, but it is good for the country. It means that we'll help people get off welfare and into jobs. We don't need John Howard-style punitive measures. We need to help people, and they'll help us all. Innovation is vital for learning to do more with less, and Australia has historically punched above our weight in this field, but we still spend below the OECD average on R&D and have always fallen short on commercialisation, allowing others to take advantage of our smart ideas. You only have to look at the world-leading solar power technology being commercialised in China, Germany and the USA to know that. And do most people realise that the CSIRO was behind the development of wireless computing technology and that we've had to fight tooth and nail to get royalties for the invention which was commercialised overseas? The Greens want Australia to set a goal of increasing R&D funding from 2.2% to 3% of GDP, with a much greater focus on commercialisation. And this would still be less than some innovative countries like Sweden, Finland, Japan and South Korea already allocate. This will require continuing to use and better target tax measures to support R&D, as well as better funding of research institutions. The need to do more with less is also obvious to farmers, who know they have to keep producing more food, more fuel and materials, but without any more of the traditional inputs. There's no more land to find, and there's even less water, and petrochemical fertilisers are not only expensive in dollar terms, but they're expensive in biodiversity terms. Farmers know they need R&D to help them produce more food, to protect and enhance their land, to increase carbon in the landscape and to protect biodiversity on the farm. And to that end, I'm really proud of the fact that the Greens negotiated the $1 billion fund, the Biodiversity Fund, to help farmers. It is an obvious demonstration of how the Greens and the farmers have got plenty in common. In industry more broadly, as well as in our homes and businesses, energy and water efficiency are not only vital for a sustainable future, but they save money and improve productivity. Yet many of the easy energy efficiency opportunities still haven't been taken up by industry or householders. Clearly, we need to get our priorities straight. Why, for instance, are some jobs seen as more equal than others? Jobs in mining and manufacturing are important, of course they are. But why are people who work in the public sector, delivering the services we rely on day in, day out, including doctors and nurses and teachers and carers, why are they seen as expendable by the Commonwealth? And the Commonwealth Government this year cut 4,200 this year alone. So why do we give billions to multinational corporations and not more assistance to jobs-rich small businesses, such as our proposal to increase the instant asset write-off to $10,000? Why is it more important to support those parts of our economy that dig things up and cut them down and ship them away than it is to invest in creating a smart, diverse, resilient business sector? It's not complex economics to know that having all your eggs in one basket is simply bad risk management. Just like energy efficiency saving us money and cutting pollution, policies that care for people and protect the environment also help the economy. This is not only true if you rethink economic goals, it's also true of the existing economic paradigm. Food, clothing and housing are essentials, yet we have abandoned housing in public policy. 18,600 people sleep in crisis accommodation around the country right now. Surely we can help people live in highly energy-efficient homes connected to public transport instead of promoting cheap, inefficient housing on the edge of cities unconnected to transport and displacing agricultural land. Of all things that are precious, time is paramount. We long to have more of it to improve our quality of life, yet a Greens work-life balance bill attracts condemnation. The experience of thousands of small and large business owners is that if you give employees flexibility and treat them with respect as human beings with families and private lives, they'll work harder for you and do a better job. Treating refugees as new and valued members of the Australian community instead of criminals who need to be locked up or shipped away is not only the right thing to do, but it costs 90% less. And frankly, that saving to the budget is worth far less than the immediate benefit to all of us of helping people who've fled persecution and the threat of death and helping them to become productive members of our society, which is all they ever want to be. Investing in the arts might seem frivolous to some, but it brings joy to millions of Australians every year. What's more, our major performing arts groups earned $1.57 for every dollar of government funding in 2011. Chamber music earned $3.75 for every dollar in funding, as well as working to ensure artists, young and old, established and cutting edge, are supported in their work. The Greens want to see the location tax offset for films increased to 30% in line with global practice. Attracting blockbusters to be made here ensures that we keep the skilled workers and technology we need for a flourishing domestic film industry to entertain and tell our stories to the world. And there are so many other examples of how working to protect the environment also helps people, creates jobs and drives economic activity. Despite what the coal companies want you to think, investing in renewable energy brings power prices down, helping householders and the economy at large. Experience shows that because solar and wind power have marginal costs close to zero, while coal and gas have much higher costs to ramp up production, the more renewable energy that we have in our system, the cheaper wholesale power prices become. Ignore claims that we need coal to keep power prices down. Solar and wind is the path to more affordable energy bills, more jobs in local manufacturing and less of the pollution that drives global warming. The Greens' success in establishing a $10 billion Clean Energy Finance Corporation is Australia's biggest ever step in this direction. Far from watering down the renewable energy target, now is the time to set our sights on 100% renewable energy with that target of at least 30% by 2030. Meanwhile, investing billions of dollars in expanding coal ports is extremely short-sighted, when a simple examination of our major markets for that coal, that is China and India, show that they're both moving away from coal as they see solar outcompeting it in the next few years. Government funding of coal export infrastructure should cease immediately. It's not only bad economics, not only does it lead to higher insurance premiums, but it's terrible environment policy. Long-term jobs in tourism and fishing depend on a healthy Great Barrier Reef, as does our national identity. We would be shamed as a nation if the Great Barrier Reef is listed as World Heritage in danger because we prioritised coal over our reef. On the other hand, planning sensibly for a transition away from jobs in the old polluting industries that are already in decline is much fairer and more economically sensible than propping them up until they eventually collapse. Whether it's in coal-fired power or car manufacturing, a planned transition is better for people than unplanned collapse. All of these changes in priority will make for happier, healthier people, will see us planning sensibly for the future, and will make sense for the economy as they pay very handsome dividends. But it's really true that they may need a huge investment up front. And in order to bring that about as a reality, we have to raise revenue and we have to reduce spending. Tax is not a dirty word. It's part of being a fair and sensible society that invests in caring for its own and preparing for the future. And the great majority of Australians actually agree with that. We've heard calls to boost tax revenue in recent weeks from the Treasury Secretary Martin Parkinson, his predecessor, of course, Ken Henry, and even the Business Council of Australia's head, Jennifer Westacott. But, unfortunately, many of the calls for a broader tax base from business figures in particular go into what I would call NIMBYism. We need more revenue, but don't tax me. Instead, they want to lift and broaden the GST, causing more pain to people already struggling to afford food bills, for example. They say we can't tax them for fear of killing the goose that laid the golden egg. Well, the problem with that metaphor is that the goose is not much use to Jack and his mum if the ogre at the top of the beanstalk keeps all the eggs to himself and refuses to share. Despite what some commentators want you to believe, the Greens are actually the most economically responsible party in the parliament, even by the old measures, because we supported the stimulus package, we've put forward billions of dollars of sensible revenue and savings measures to match the investments that we need in order to care for people and nature. Removing 4 big fossil fuel subsidies, including making sure mining corporations pay the same excise on the fuel they use that you and I do, would create an additional $2.8 billion in revenue in next year's financial year, and would have created $7.6 billion in revenue from 2012-13 until 2014-15. Reforming superannuation tax concessions to encourage those doing it tougher now to also save for retirement would save $2.6 billion in its first year. The total additional revenue the government could have raised through these simple and Treasury-costed steps is $13.2 billion over 3 years. In addition, a suite of more ambitious proposals, such as closing the mining tax loophole that is seeing state premiers gouge royalties out of Commonwealth funds, broadening the base of the tax to what Ken Henry originally proposed, a fair increase in the top marginal tax rate for millionaires to 50%, removing free carbon permits from coal-fired power stations, removing support for coal export infrastructure, and a very small 0.1% tax on financial transactions could raise many billions more. The Greens negotiated with the government to establish a parliamentary budget office to independently cost each party's policies. That budget office has now been established, and we've committed to full transparency through it to release more of these costed proposals as we approach next year's federal election. Will Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey commit to doing the same? The other aim of tax reform that the Greens are focused on is continuing the progress towards a system which encourages more forward-thinking, cleaner investments, ones which tax the bads and reward the goods. The Clean Energy Act is a prime example of this. By putting a price on the pollution which drives global warming and balancing that out by tripling the tax-free threshold so that people who earn less than $18,200 pay no tax at all. The price on pollution is only a first step, but it's a hugely significant first step towards the zero-emissions economy of the future, the only one in which people and nature can survive and flourish. The Greens' vision is becoming mainstream globally, with Australian politics and commentariat catching up. The ideas I've set out today are all from established economic theory based on the early 20th century work of Arthur Pigou, John Maynard Keynes, as well as the more recent Nobel Prize winners from Joseph Stiglitz to Paul Krugman to Amartya Sen. They also encompass vital scientific work being done by the CSIRO with its megatrends analysis. We can make this vision a reality, but only if we recognise that the economy needs to serve the needs of people and nature, and not the other way round, and the Greens are up for the challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Milne. And now it's time for some questions from our media members, and given I've got the microphone in the list, I'll take the first question. Senator Milne, you mentioned that you will have policies costed by the Parliamentary Budget Office. Since the last election, you've been able to have your policies costed by Treasury. How often have you taken advantage of that, and will you be releasing those costings publicly either now or as your policies come out?
We've taken advantage of that opportunity to have some of our policies costed, and I've related some of those today. We've made most of them public, almost all I think, and we will be in the course of the lead up to the next election, but we're certainly undertaking that we will go to the next federal election with our policy platform fully costed by either the Treasury in this case or the Parliamentary Budget Office. The government will have its policies actually costed by Treasury. It is the coalition running away from actually having its budget propositions costed.
And you'll release those costings in full?
Yes, we've been releasing them so far in full. That the 10,000 tax write-off, for example, has already been released, so we've been doing that and will continue to do so.
Our next question is from Mark Kenny from the Adelaide Advertiser.
Mark Kenny, is that on? Mark Kenny from the Advertiser, Senator Milne. You mentioned a good health system should fix problems of the mind and the teeth. I fear I may have cavities in both, so I'll preface my question with that. But Lindsay Tanner today has revealed that he planned to quit politics even before Julia Gillard replaced Kevin Rudd, and it seemed that he was of the view that the Greens are coming for the Labor Party in these inner metropolitan seats. I wonder if you could comment on that. Is that a trend that you see as inevitable, that the Greens will come to replace Labor in those seats? And just quickly, if I could, on something you said in the speech, you mentioned that Australia's debt to GDP ratio is 29%. Now, the government says that's more likely to peak at around 9.8%, as I recall. So I'm just wondering if you could explain the difference.
So on the first point about Lindsay Tanner, Lindsay Tanner also said that the Labor Party hasn't come to grips with issues like asylum seekers, that it hasn't come to grips with issues like ecological sustainability, and that is one of its big problems. That is why it will continue to lose and continue to lose its way, because it's not actually taking into account the major trends of the century. If you have a look at the CSIRO's megatrends, the first one is do more with less. The second one is going, gone, which is about species extinction, biodiversity loss and so on. The Labor Party is still taking the environment for granted. They can't be trusted on the environment, and that is going to continue to be a driver of votes lost to them and picked up by the Greens. As to your second point about the debt to GDP ratio, they are the figures that I've been given. I don't know where the government's figures are coming from. Happy to check, but I don't know why there's a difference.
Next question is from Andrew Probyn.
Senator Andrew Probyn from the West Australian newspaper. During my lovely 2 years down in Tasmania, I remember former Premier Jim Bacon saying that the F word never to be mentioned in his household was forestry. He used the other F word more liberally, I might add. But on that topic, and this is a yes or no answer, hopefully from you, would the Greens support a chlorine-free, closed-loop, plantation-only feedstock pulp mill? Yes or no? Before you answer that, on the W word, wheat, what is the Greens' position on the full deregulation of the wheat industry? And if it gets through the House, what would the Greens do in the Senate?
Okay, so on the wheat industry, that's straightforward. We signed on to the dissenting report from the Senate committee. We don't support the full deregulation of the wheat industry. We support the ongoing. We might support some changes to the way that the Wheat Export Authority currently works, but we're not going to support full deregulation. So that's clear. Back to the issue of Tasmania and forests. Guns, as everybody would be aware, has now gone into administration. That has led to a major discussion in Tasmania. I have to say it's an enormous weight that's lifted from the shoulders of all Tasmanians now that that project is finished. We have an opportunity to draw a line under it, to move forward to the kind of strong and diversified economy Tasmania can have. And in terms of jobs, you know, we have 600 scientists as a marine and scientific hub in Hobart. Fantastic, and people keep talking about wanting some great white elephant project to come across the horizon and recognise Tasmania. That is the wrong way to go. We've now got the opportunity for a resilient, lots of medium, small-scale businesses and so on. As to your issue about a pulp mill in Tasmania is not the right way to go. We have moved on from that. The question now is, what are we going to do with the existing plantation estate? And part of the problem with that is that Erica Betts oversaw a ridiculous managed investment scheme rollout of plantations in the wrong places. The Commonwealth invested in Forestry Tasmania, which planted the wrong species of trees. So the issue there is, what are we going to do with the existing plantation estate? But it won't be a pulp mill.
The next question is from David Rowe.
David Rowe from the Sydney Morning Herald. Senator, thanks for your speech. I can't think of too many people who would disagree with the proposition that we need a broader set of criteria than only GDP to measure our success as a nation. But listening to you, I was sort of wondering if there's a shoe to drop here in terms of whether there are sacrifices to be made in achieving that. Now, whether it's a slightly faster car or a slightly larger house, and leaving aside the hue and pine condoms and the nettle, I can't imagine. Maybe I don't lead a very adventurous life, but I can't imagine how those would actually operate. Leaving all that aside and those cliches about the Greens, are you prepared to acknowledge that perhaps some sacrifices do need to be made? And you know, are there things that we feel as if we've become entitled to and that we should actually be prepared to sacrifice? And can you give us a sense of what you think those things are?
Okay, so to the last thing first, what's really encouraging is the number of people who have now said, and this is one of the CSIRO's mega trends as well, people now want experiences more than things. So people are actually asking for society to create more opportunities for them to be fulfilled as a person, rather than more things to put in their house or their office or to measure their well-being by. So that trend is already happening, and creating experiences for people ought to have less of an ecological footprint than having more stuff as such. In terms of how society would change, there are huge opportunities to retrofit houses to make them more energy efficient, to regulate to have higher standards on white goods, for example, to make them more energy efficient. So things won't change dramatically, but in terms of there will be transitions out of some of the old industries. That's absolutely the case, and we have to find new ways of engaging with industry. And one of those, let me go to the car fleet, for example, and in particular the millions that we've spent subsidising the car industry. Adam Bandt has been saying, and we've all been saying for some time, if we're going to subsidise car making in Australia, let's actually make it an electric car. Let's actually go to a futuristic concept rather than keep subsidising business as usual. And there's a huge opportunity there. If you actually think about getting a critical mass of electric cars built in Australia and linking that to actually putting that energy into the grid and shaving off the peaks in the afternoon, actually doing it as a strategy, you'd have amazing uptake, not only of the cars, but actually of greater savings in energy. So I see there will be changes, but most of them will be good. People want to be healthier, they want to be happier, and everywhere you've seen investment in better designed cities, cycleways, urban gardens and the like, you've had greater attraction for people wanting to live there, and the places that are becoming less attractive to people are those that represent the old, inefficient way of using resources in city planning, for example.
Next question is from Paul Osborne.
Paul Osborne from Australian Associated Press. Thank you for your speech, Senator. My question's about media reform. It's a triple-barrelled question. You seem to be a little less critical of the media, particularly the press gallery, than your predecessor, who had some very colourful battles with the hate media in particular. Is this a strategic decision on your part? And will you be urging the government to act on media reform in this term, given that it appears to be going towards the too hard basket for Labor? And just a third question, which is a follow-up. Where do you stand personally on trying to improve the quality of the news media?
Okay, so to the first question, it's not a strategic decision to engage the media one way or the other. I think I've been described as the sort of person, what you see is what you get, and I hope that that's the way that I'm able to engage with most of the media. I think that we have an obligation to work as cooperatively and collaboratively as we can with the press gallery, and I would hope that the same will be in return. And if it's not, well, we'll work out a new way of working after that. Secondly, on media reform, yes, we want to see changes to media reform, changes to media. We've outlined that previously. Yes, it's going too slowly. We've had the Finkelstein review, we've had the convergence review. We now need to actually work on those. And the third thing, just remind me.
Improving quality.
Improving quality of media. Well, it's an interesting thing that's going on in the media at the moment. I was really alarmed when I saw the number of experienced journalists who are losing their jobs from various media outlets. I was alarmed to see specialist arts writers, science writers and so on losing their jobs from the mainstream media. On the other hand, I'm greatly encouraged by the quality of journalism on some of the online sites. Conversation in particular, I think, is making a major contribution in the energy sector. I think Giles Parkinson's work's fantastic. So I think what we're going to see is people making choices about congregating around some quality outlets, and we're going to see different ways in which media is going to be defined. How that's going to play out in the long term, nobody really knows. But Twitter, for example, is making a big difference, you can access to so many in-depth pieces from all over the world. Journalism is changing. There are new opportunities, but nevertheless, I regret the loss from the mainstream of some of the specialist writers in those papers, because I think the public debate is worse off for that.
Next question from Michelle Grattan.
Michelle Grattan from The Age. Senator Milne, the polls indicate that an Abbott government is likely next year. I wonder if you could speculate or tell us how you see the mandate of that government, the limits of the mandate and the extent of it. And what would you say to a voter who intended to vote for a change of government but would like a Senate that provides some check on that government, however does not want a Senate that frustrates a new government?
Thank you, Michelle. So as to the first one, with an Abbott-led coalition, I've been saying for some time, and I still say it, that I don't think Tony Abbott will lead the coalition into the federal election next year. And I say that because business in Australia can't afford the recklessness with which he approaches the question of what to do about emissions reductions in Australia. He has a $70 billion black hole. Business must surely be shaking their heads, and they want certainty. They have been given certainty with the framework that's been delivered in the clean energy framework that the Greens negotiated with the government, and I think there will be many business interests around Australia saying, for goodness sake, you have to change your policy. If they did that, they'd have to change their leader because he's so clearly identified with it. Having said that, though, if indeed he did lead them into the election, the Greens will play an absolutely critical role in holding the balance of power in the Senate. I think so many people have seen that the Greens in the Senate have been an influence for innovation and for stability, and it doesn't matter whether you go back to the Rudd Prime Ministership, when it was the Greens who supported the stimulus package and the coalition who voted against it, and so it was the Greens who helped stave off recession in Australia at that time. It has been the Greens who have put forward innovative policies throughout in addressing climate change, for example, as I just indicated, the Parliamentary Budget Office, Denticare. People are looking at what the Greens are doing, and I think what they could be guaranteed about is you've got a highly intelligent, dedicated group of people with very clear policies and a group of people who will stand up for those policies, won't change them, and will stand up to Tony Abbott on it. And we will be saying clearly to all Australians there is no way we will be repealing the emissions trading scheme. There's no way we will be supporting getting rid of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation or the Biodiversity Fund, and we will not be changing our position on saying that we want to embrace the asylum seekers and refugees who come to Australia and make them a part of our community.